Now, a system like this tends to be really wealthy because whenever you have a lot of adults, especially older adults with fewer kids, the money that they used to spend on raising children is then spent on more conspicuous consumption. It generates a lot more interesting economic activity until you approach retirement. And then all of the money gets shoved away into the retirement savings. That's what's going on in Canada right now. We're at that moment, the breath before the plunge, the last moment before mass retirement. That takes us a lot of interesting directions. Now, what's going on now is the globalization system is collapsing. This is total American troops stationed abroad since World War II. The numbers have been trending down for quite some time. On the off chance you haven't read a newspaper in the last year, that yellow bar is in the process of going from its final couple of hundred to zero. The United States no longer has a military footprint around the world necessary to maintain globalization, even if they wanted to. It's not that we Americans have decided to leave. It's that we've already left. And what is left of the global trade system is simply coasting on inertia. The Americans couldn't protect it if they wanted to. But disrupt it, oh yeah. Blue lines are the major trade lanes. The red circles are the major choke points of those trade lanes. Now, there are 8 choke points in the world. 7 of the 8 are in the Eastern Hemisphere. 6 of those are along the line that Europe and Asia are utterly dependent upon for their trade. And 6 of them are along energy routes that keep the lights on in Asia. No country on Earth can reach more than 2 of them in force, except the United States, which can reach them all. So 2 things. If you want to worry about something, worry about this. If you remove the United States, those choke points become very choky. And second, if you flip U.S. policy, because the U.S. isn't dependent upon trade, that was the bribe. The U.S. is not dependent on trade, its competitors are. Then the United States has the ability to easily disrupt any competitor's economic capacity. Our whole lives, we have thought of the United States as the guarantor of stability. It's time to start thinking of the United States as an agent of disorder rather than order. And the timing couldn't be worse. Here are a number of major economies' demographic structures in the year 2000, the height of globalization. And it was kind of perfect because you had a number of countries that were younger and consumption-led, and then a number that were demographically older, and so were more export-led. Canada then, Canada today. But 20 years later, we're all 20 years older, and the balance has shifted, and not in a good way, because the consumption-led countries are aging into export-led, and the export-led are aging into mass retirement. The time that we think of as normal, the post-Cold War era, when everyone was in balance, and when the ceiling was being held up and there was no threat of war, that was an unprecedented geopolitical moment, which overlapped with an unprecedented demographic moment. And it will never come again. Now, the United States is a little different. The demographic structure is a little bit more of a chimney, and we need to focus on the various generations so you can understand what's happening with workforce and inflation. So first of all, the baby boomers, they are the largest generation we have ever had in the United States as a percentage of the population. And all baby boomers, like all generations, do everything together. Born at the same time, go to school at the same time, get married at roughly the same time, start families at the same time, retire at the same time. Now, baby boomers are the American centerweight when it comes to upper management and agriculture and blue-collar work and trucking. They're concentrated in specific types of sectors, and they're now all leaving the workforce at the same time. On average, the American baby boomers leave the workforce this year. So we have already passed the peak, and we're about to have an accelerating slide in terms of their consumption, their investment, and above all, their work hours. Now, for the Americans, this is going to seem really dramatic. Americans love their drama. And that's because we've always had a backstop in the Mexicans. Mexican in-migration from their relatively young demography has supplemented the United States for quite some time. But look what happened 25 years ago. When the tequila crisis happened, the Mexicans tripled down on operationalizing NAFTA, and Mexico belatedly, finally began industrializing for real. And so we saw the drop in birth rate. Well, you fast forward today, and the Mexicans will never have the degree of population among their youth that they have had in the past relative to their population, which means in-migration to the United States cannot happen as it has before. In fact, in-migration has already been negative for 11 of the last 12 years. So even a minor adjustment is going to feel really out of whack to Americans, and we're going to bitch and moan about higher labor costs for years. But it's nothing compared to what the rest of the world is going through. For example, Canada. Now, the Canadians have the same in-progress mass retirement effect of the baby boomers. But Canada's baby boomer generation is roughly a third larger relative to the overall population as the American boomer cadre. So you should expect the impact upon the Canadian workforce to be similarly larger, the impact upon government finances to be similarly more painful. And there's an investment side to this too, because as you age, the way you invest changes. When you're 35 and you have a very small income, you save very little for the future. When you're 50, you have a larger income and you save a larger percentage of it. Your velocity of capital explodes. And when you're 64 and 3/4 and it's your last paycheck, every dime you have, you shove away into your retirement accounts. As you age, your velocity of capital increases with you. Now, the gray bar, that is the net wealth of your average Canadian by decade. You can see as it rises up and then you retire and then it starts to fall. Now, the United States is the orange bar. And I don't want you guys to have cringe concerns here because we cheat. One of the reasons that the United States numbers are so high is because this is average. This includes the American top 1%. The American numbers are huge because half of all financial assets in the United States are held by the 1%. Now, there's a number of takeaways from this. First of all, we are in the most capital-rich moment in human history, and it ends this year. Because this year, the baby boomers around the world reach that tipping point, and we'll have lost half of them from the workforce at some point in this year. They will never come back. Their investment dollars will never come back. Second, there is a partial patch in the United States because of inequality. Because when you retire with $100 million, you know you're not going to need all of it. And so you'll keep roughly a quarter of it actively engaged. You'll probably start bequeathing a third of it to your children or the next generation or to charities. The money doesn't remain locked up in a glacier until you pass. But that only happens in blindingly, raging